Having studied China myself for a long period of time, the US continues to basically miss the point of what is it that has made China successful. So the US likes to think that China has been successful because they stole American IP. But China under 2025 has now been developing its own IP and obviously very successfully. So the US is basically starting out with the notion that China is somehow playing unfairly. And sometimes they'll point to industrial policies which have the government involved in economics, which the US thinks they should not be. So what I did is basically step back and say, when all is said and done, what is it that really distinguishes China? So the first thing I'd point to are Confucian values. So let me take a crack at taking something that's complicated, Confucian values, and reduce it to its most simple form. And essentially what Confucian values say is that every individual has the responsibility to improve themselves through hard work and education, not for their own personal benefit, but for the benefit of their family and the country. So the first thing is Chinese people just work harder. Now, part of it's understandable because if you look at the Industrial Revolution, which hit the US in the late 19th century, I think if we had the records, people were working 70-hour weeks way back then because the country was young, it was expanding geographically, it was building brand new industries at a very rapid clip. And basically, the Industrial Revolution was driving the energy of the US people, and hard work was an integral part of that. If you think about it, China did not really have its Industrial Revolution until Deng took over in the late 1970s. So China's only had its Industrial Revolution for 40 years. So if you go back and say, how hard did Americans work at the same point as China is in its Industrial Revolution? They work just as hard as the Chinese do today. But that was over 120 years ago. So the first thing that has propelled China, I would argue, is a work ethic that is dramatically more demanding than what it is in the US today. The second thing is the emphasis that Confucian values put on education. The first one is that individuals are asked at a relatively young age, do they want to focus on STEM subjects or humanities? And the reality is most Chinese students opt for STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. The other thing that's different about education is that if you look at teachers in China and ask how they are respected, they would rate number one or number two across all professions. If you ask the same question in the US, teachers are ranked in the bottom third of all professions. So the phrase you frequently hear in America is those who can do, those who can't teach. And that's just a very different attitude in China. And the second strength that China has that's extremely important is the power of having a single party central government where everybody's on the same page. And most importantly, where people are advanced in their career meritocratically. And so when I have spent time with senior people in China, they're very highly educated, they're worldly, and they are all, the ones I've talked to, very committed to the long-term success of China. So, and that's a very different model than a two-party system, which is what we have in the US, which is basically a divisive model where there's competition and where you have very sharp swings from one year to the next. So we came within one vote of disbanding Obamacare, which the US had already invested tens of billions of dollars to install. And so you get very significant swings in policy and priority depending on whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans who are in power in the US. So the second strength is the advantage of having a powerful central government. And the other big difference on that dimension is in China forever, the best and the brightest have gone into government service. In US forever, the best and the brightest have gone into business as the US focused on a minimalist government. So that second advantage is very much the governance model. The third advantage is industrial policy. So China takes a long-term view, sets priorities 10 to 20 years out, makes commitments and allocates resources to those priorities, and then organizes the best talent for that subject. So when they put together a priority of EVs and batteries, they went out and got the most experienced experts in those fields, drawn from government, state-owned enterprises, the universities, the private sector, and managed that process over a 10 to 12 year period, which enabled them to go from nowhere in automobiles to being the global leader within a 10 to 12 year period of time. Now, the US tried recently its first major industrial policy, which was its CHIPS Act, where we wanted to catch up with the lost ground in the fact that we were not doing much manufacturing of semiconductors in the US. But rather than go to the best talent available, it was given to the Commerce Department and came out with what most chip experts would say would be a very mediocre, low impact solution. And the reality is the skills required to pull together large groups of people from very different sources is extraordinarily high. China's been doing it for the last 40 years. The US is just getting started. By just getting started, they're not going to be able to match China for many years to come. And then the fourth and final advantage is that, as Kishore Mahbubani, who used to be the Singaporean representative to the UN, put it, he said, the US is a melting pot. We have many different ethnicities drawn from different countries, which was part of the strength of the US because immigrants really fueled the energy in the country if you go back to the 18th and 19th and early 20th century. China is not a by nature divided country. 93% of Chinese are Han ethnically, and they all grew up with Confucian values. So when the government announces a priority, the vast majority of people get behind it. So those four strengths, Confucian values, one, strong central government with high talent people, number two, number three, industrial policies to make real progress on long-term priorities, and number four, a unified people are enormous strengths.